Great. So hopefully everyone can hear me now. So thanks very much, Andreas, for just introducing me here, and just want to quickly introduce the topic I've chosen to focus on here today. In the overall topic of transitioning to remote research, I'm going to be focusing on remote UX testing specifically, and especially when everyone's remote. So right now, it's not just the participants that's remote, it's actually all of the team and even people who are observing the session as well. That's what I'm going to do a bit of a deep dive in today. And I'm just going to get to change screens. So as Andreas says, my name's Jonas. I'm a design practitioner, and I mostly work in the private sector, kind of, as Andreas says, all the way from multinationals to new startups, as well as part of Nile's co-foundry. And I mainly focus on service design, insight, and innovation. And on the topic of remote UX testing, I have extensive experience both in testing our own solutions, so as part of bigger programs of work, but also specifically clients coming to us with things they wanted to test out as well. So I've kind of both sides of that. And I've also trained design teams in design thinking and UX testing as well, and also as part of that remotely. So just really quickly touching on Nile. So we're a strategic design company. We focus on innovation, experience, insight, and culture. We're based in lovely Edinburgh, but we're working across the UK and the US. And we've been working with service design for over the past 10 years. And before that, we had kind of a real grounding in user research and a really strong heritage in user testing. That also means that all of our consultants are trained in user testing as well. So it's kind of the nature of the company of most people will be able to carry out user testing and also remote user testing. So just a word on the times that we're in now. So as I see it, kind of now more than ever is the time to be talking to customers and users, both in a kind of in a private context, but also kind of outside of that as well, and really understand the new context they live in, especially before going live. So especially thinking about UX testing of products or updates that you're thinking of launching, because of the circumstances and context having changed for users and how that influences how someone uses something and perceives something as well. So before kind of doing a deep dive into user testing, I just want to quickly touch on some of the basics for people who are not that familiar with UX testing, haven't done it before, might not have observed it that much before. Just really quickly kind of get people's head around it of kind of what it is we do. So it's all about finding a target user, getting them in front of something, a product or service, but an experience, and kind of understand how they use something, understand what they think about using it, their response and reactions to it. The reason why you do this is to both identify and validate new and unexpected ways for product to become better. So it's all about saying, what you've designed, does that live up to your expectation? Does it do what you want it to do? There's always lots of unintended consequences when you get real people in front of something. There's a real big point around when to do user testing. I think you could probably do a whole talk on that, but I think the ambiguous question would be kind of early enough. It's quite a balancing act about doing it so early so you can still change it, but it's also doing it so early so you can still get something out of it. So that's a real balancing act. I think especially for kind of service designers and not necessarily specifically people working in user experience design, it's often more about kind of UX testing is sometimes more about communicating propositions kind of as part of a larger journey instead of really focusing in on the usability side of things. But there's several sides to it really of how useful is something and how usable is it. The work we do is mainly focused on behavioral research. So it's not necessarily as much about measuring the experience. It's not about how long people look at something, how long they look at a page, that side of things. So it's not about the metrics, but it's more about the perception and the behavior of the participant and then improving it off the back of that. I think with UX testing, before we dive into remote side of things, kind of the key thing is focus on what you want to learn instead of just what you want to test. It's all about kind of creating kind of testable experiences, but it's really key to kind of have the kind of clear objectives and the right questions for the right participants and get them in front of what you want to test. And kind of the very basics of it is you need a clear idea of the questions you're going to ask, so a discussion guide. You need to understand who are the participants we're interested in and get the right participants. Also get them on board with confidentiality and that side of things. And then finally, that's kind of where a lot of people tend to maybe focus too much. Some people focus too little on it, but kind of the experience you want to test and really making that testable. And that's really where you can also easily fail. In kind of, you want to design something that you can learn from instead of design something that will pass a test. And I'm just going to get some water. Thanks. Right. So UX testing, what are your options? There's quite a few options of how to do things. At the moment with the current situation, we're limited. It means that we can't really do in person anymore, both moderated and moderated. It means that we need to move to remote testing instead. That can mean two things. It can mean moderated or it can mean unmoderated for remote testing. So is there a person that talks to the person interacting with something or isn't there? So let's have a quick look at the differences between the two. So moderated and unmoderated. Unmoderated, there's a lot of online platforms that offer this at the moment, and it seems to be kind of growing of the offering in that space. It's great. Most of the time with the work that we tend to do, we don't tend to use unmoderated. I do know of a lot of clients that we work with that do use it, and if you use it in the right way, you can definitely get value out of it. But from our perspective, it's kind of, I would say that you only identify showstoppers, bugs, and issues, and only gives you surface level insight when someone goes through something and talks about what they see themselves. If you want kind of the full depth of insight, so understanding kind of needs, behaviors, attitudes, and reasoning behind decisions, you need to go towards moderated instead, and that's kind of where it can both be in person or remote. But with remote not being an option at the moment, with in person not being an option at the moment, we need to look at remote testing. And there are advantages and disadvantages with remote UX testing. With remote UX testing, you do get greater diversity of participants, or that's at least something you open up for. Thinking about people that you can't reach at the moment, thinking about busy professionals, thinking about working moms, thinking about people in remote locations. So kind of you do reach a different audience with it. There's also kind of the basic one of a lower cost than in person, potential low incentive if it's incentivized. You don't have a venue you need to hire. You don't necessarily need to travel to them, or they don't need to travel to you. And you can actually often do it faster as well. So you don't depend on having a research venue available, booking everyone in on the same day, and kind of the complex logistics of that side of it. Also, it's a kind of a double-edged sword of it's sometimes easier to observe, both for project teams and stakeholders. And I'll get a bit back to observation a bit later on, but it is easier for someone to join and observe from their office than it is to either travel somewhere to observe from a lab or that side of things. But there's also a few downsides that need to mitigate against. Is saying it can exclude some people. So it's definitely worth considering, is remote the right approach? At the moment, it's the only one, but it also means that some less IT literate can struggle with gaining access to it. There are ways to do it and get some people on board, but you will miss out on some people. It's much easier for people to turn up somewhere in that sense. There can be a high risk of dropouts without pre-engagement of participants. It's much easier for people to drop out of a session like that instead of a session in person. As kind of Jana touched on, you need to work harder to build trust and rapport with participants. There's also a point I'll touch a bit on how to do that a bit later on. And the observation experience overall for people observing the session can be less engaging, especially if you're doing it alone with everyone being remote. But that actually kind of brings me to one of the main points that I want to cover here. Of all of that actually means that remote UX testing is actually not kind of the worst version of in-person UX testing at all. Thinking about kind of there are actually several benefits from it. That's also why kind of we here at Nile already do about half of our research remotely by default. So not just thinking about now, but we actually do run quite a lot of remote research for those reasons, to reach the right audiences and get good diversity in our research as well. So I think kind of just touching on kind of the transitioning to remote research and remote UX testing, I think kind of overall, you shouldn't really transition to it. I think you should always consider remote UX testing as an option, even if you can do in person, because of the potential benefits that it gives you. So on remote UX testing, let's have a look at our approach to making that successful. So there's 3 key points I want to cover with all of you. There's quite a bit of details in the upcoming slides, and I do have a supporting blog for this as well, so you can get all the details as well. But some of it I will go over a bit quicker than other bits. So we talk kind of about 3 things, 3 principles here. We talk about technology as the enabler. We talk about building strong relationships, and we talk about the value of live observation. So let's just kind of go into the technology as the enabler. And here we're saying it's not the answer. So what we mean by that is that, yes, you do need great technology to enable you to run this, but it's not the answer to making good UX testing. This is an overview of our tried and tested toolkit that we've been developing over the years. I think some things I just want to highlight there, especially that I found useful within the last year. Definitely check out Dovetail for note-taking. It's absolutely amazing. Otter AI for transcripts. We'll touch on some of the other bits as well. DocuSign for consent forms, absolutely brilliant. And then we're also always kind of looking at new ways of doing things. So at the moment, we're looking at Masonry Collective as well. But it's not just about the kind of the tools that you're using. It's about kind of getting the technology right and avoiding problems as well. So kind of there's a couple of principles here. Is there's always run at least 1 pilot session to make sure you know how it's all working, because there are several complexities to it. There's a lot of dependencies on prototype working, all that side of things. Always brief research participants beforehand. Always figure out what device you want them to be on as well. Have backup options available. Always have, like, for example, for sound, if that kind of doesn't work that well, always be able to fall back on phone. Also think about your tech workflow. So we talked a bit about kind of the technology that we're using, but also think about how you start to connect some of those things to really create a workflow for yourself. And always have someone to help your observers as well. It's not just the participants that can be having trouble. So think about kind of, for example, a note taker role in this as well. Then moving on to the point that Jana also touched upon about building strong relationships. So as we see it, you get better insight by building strong relationships with participants. And I mean, there's a lot to it. We have a couple of principles coming up, but it's really kind of, I think on this one, I just want to touch on, first of all, thinking about, the first thing you need to think about is how you represent yourself. So I've done a couple of screenshots on the left-hand side of kind of me with my background at the moment, and kind of how that kind of means that it seems like people can see that I'm at home, they can see my son's toys in the background, they can see a bicycle, they can relate a bit more to you in that sense, rather than being totally shut off by a background and having kind of seeing nothing at all. So it is, a lot of it is about creating personal connections and actually seeing where someone are and connecting with them a bit more in that sense. We've kind of put together kind of 4 principles based on that. So there's a bit around establishing our trustworthiness, especially when remote. That's important because they might have come through, let's say, a recruitment agency, or we might have recruited them directly, but it's different than coming to a venue that you don't necessarily have the same trust. I mean, they're just dialing in and telling you something about their life or their professional life. So you really need to work a bit harder on telling you a bit, kind of tell a bit more about yourself, tell a bit more about your company, really relate to them on an emotional level as well. We also focus much more time when doing remote UX on learning about them, both to get them a bit comfortable with maybe an unusual situation of sitting and talking to someone over video chat, which maybe isn't that much of a problem anymore, but it definitely was before they used, when there wasn't as big a take up of kind of video interviews. Also, we make a thing about making silence acceptable. Some people need more time to think than others, and often leaving people to have a think about something, sit and write things down on a piece of paper, for example, and give them a task often brings out new things as well. And also kind of really importantly, kind of lean in and be engaged, even if you're not interacting with them, but kind of really show that it matters what they're telling you and you find it important, but still without leading participants, of course. Thirdly, I want to just cover off the value of live observation. So it's not just insight that you get from the user using something, but actually often you have teams observing as well. And we really encourage teams and stakeholders to come and observe sessions, because actually often we get insight out of them as well that they haven't necessarily told us. When you see someone using something, it kind of prompts a conversation and you get some really valuable business insight from that as well, or insight about kind of, if it's about like complex products, for example, or things you can't really unpick yourself, it's all really good to have expert at hand as well. The ways we do that is we try to always have observer briefings. Best thing is doing it over best thing is in person. Secondly, over a call like we're doing now. But if you can't do that, having them written up as well. We have a kind of a live observer chat happening at the same time. So we get people to join a group chat and kind of comment on what's happening. So you're just not sitting on your own. And we, after each session, we also do active remote debriefs to kind of understand what was actually happening and have a conversation about. So you're just not just sitting there on your own. So there's been quite a lot of things I've gone through today, and you haven't necessarily got all the details here. I've written up a blog on this exact topic. So if you do want to read more, I'll post this in the comment as well. And I think Andreas and the team have that as well. So that's everything from me. And I want to know if there's any questions from you guys. By the way, we love remote UX testing, but we really miss the office still.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That was fantastic. Yeah, a lot of information in there. I did post a link to one of the blogs, so I think that's the right one. But yeah, if you could post one in there, that would be great to be able to go back and reflect on that. So much in there. We've got a few questions for you. So I will start at the bottom. So the first one that came in, is there a moment of when unmoderated and moderated testing would be most appropriate? For example, is unmoderated testing better for beta testing?
Sorry, better for?
Beta testing, so alpha, beta.
Oh, yeah. That's an interesting one. It really depends on kind of, maybe I want to go back a bit of talking about, it really depends on where you are in your process. Mm-hmm. It's kind of the first thing is really focus on what you want to learn before deciding how you want to test something. So if what you want to learn is, are people struggling to use this? Are there any issues? Can people go through it? Then often unmoderated is more effective at doing quick iterations of things. Mm-hmm. And there definitely is a space for it. We don't tend to get that involved in it, but I do know a lot of people that find it really useful for iterating quickly on things. And it's a really quick turnaround as well. So it definitely is kind of a good amount. And as you're saying, it's easier to test two different versions of something and see how something performs as well. So there's a real good kind of speed of it. And I think that's the kind of upper hand that unmoderated do have, is speed, but it does suffer on depth of insight. So it also depends on when you do something. It's definitely kind of worth considering unmoderated later on in the process as well, when you think your design is finished, if there's such a thing, just to kind of get final verification of something. So yes, it really does have its place in there.
Excellent, thank you very much. That was a great answer. So talking about synthesis then, so about remote synthesis, in your experience, what is a good way to work with your team and extended stakeholders to go through what happened in the research sessions?
Mm-hmm. So there's a couple of things to it. There is, it kind of depends on the level of detail. I think I'll take on kind of saying we'll do kind of full-on remote user testing, not just a kind of a light round of something really quickly. Mm-hmm. If I do full-on user testing, we would have two people working on it basically. We would have one person running the session, facilitating it, and would have one person kind of managing the observers and writing notes in Dovetail. And what that gives you is you can tag things as you go on, and you have your discussion guides you can tag it based on that, and that gives you a really quick synthesis. But also at the same time, we do run remote debriefs as well, and we use Miro for doing that. You can either do kind of a very structured debrief if it's really kind of screen-based, or you can do a more of a free-form style thing as well. So it really depends, again, what you want to learn and what you're testing as well, and how big it is. Sometimes it's better to have screenshots of everything and being able to comment on it. And sometimes it's better to have kind of an overall thought about it. But definitely recommend kind of thinking about what's the framework for having a useful conversation, especially if it's only kind of 10 or 15 minutes after a session.
Excellent, fantastic, great tips there as well. Okay, so one last question, and there's a couple on, there's still a couple on there, but one last question. Silence, you mentioned about saying that it's okay for users to be silent. So silence can be super valuable in research, but when working remotely, it is often immediately results are uncertain. Sort of, did I lose them? Did my internet stop? Did I freeze? How do you balance that?
There's a couple of things that, like, there's probably a couple of places I would use silence, and I think the context is slightly different. Of if we're thinking about UX testing, there's often you would leave, like, especially kind of when moderating remote UX testing, you would leave someone to do a small task and then stop them and look back over it. So in that amount of time, they are doing quite a focused task, and you can see that they're progressing. At that point, it's more about showing movement so they know that you're still there, but not really seeing anything. Definitely be nodding instead of saying is always the thing, especially if you're doing summary videos. That'll so catch you out, and if you're rewatching things. Secondly, they're kind of like tasks like, for example, card sorting tasks, where you just need to introduce that it's okay to be a bit quiet, and if you do have any question, then just let me know. I've recently done a task and actually been running remote research this week, not UX testing, but where I got participants to find a piece of paper at the beginning of the session, and then we kind of showed them how to structure the piece of paper and write some things down, instead of using a tool like Miro, which is a bit of a bigger thing to get on board with. Actually getting them to do it manually and play it back to you sometimes works better, so you're not kind of alienating them with getting on board with a new tool. So there's several different ways of kind of using silence, but it's an important thing to kind of point out and call out that that's okay as well. Yeah. So I think those are the key bits there.
Excellent, perfect. Are we okay for time, Andy? Does that? Yeah, excellent. Okay, there are another couple of questions in there, so if you do want to go back and answer them, please feel free.